Margaret Newman's Theory of Health as Expanding Consciousness. Margaret Newman was born in 1933. After graduating from Baylor, she spent 5 years taking care of her mother, who was suffering from ALS, and this experience formed her decision to pursue nursing. It would also be a very crucial time in her later theory development. After her mother's passing, Margaret Newman pursued nursing and graduated with a bachelor's degree from the University of Tennessee in 1962, a master's from the University of California in 1964, and a doctorate from the New York University in 1971. She taught at the University of Minnesota School of Nursing, and she developed her theory of health as expanding consciousness in the 1970s and continued to study it and to expand on it throughout her career. I selected Margaret Newman's theory of health as expanding consciousness because it provides a framework for viewing health as a pattern of both disease and non-disease, as well as a pattern of interaction with our environment, which I believe is an important mindset for one suffering from or treating those with chronic illness. This theory also emphasizes the importance of patterns in growing and expanding the consciousness of both the patient and the nurse, and that thoughtful, intentional interactions are ultimately beneficial to both. Because we work in settings that often make it difficult to prioritize or even engage in these types of interactions, I was interested in learning more about this theory and how it could be applied effectively in nursing practice. Margaret Newman gave an overview of her theory when she stated, "The theory of health as expanding consciousness was stimulated by concern for those for whom health as the absence of disease or disability is not possible. Nurses often relate to such people facing the uncertainty, debilitation, loss, and eventual death associated with chronic illness. The theory has progressed to include the health of all persons, regardless of the presence or absence of disease. The theory asserts that every person in every situation, no matter how disordered and hopeless it may seem, is part of the universal process of expanding consciousness, a process of becoming more of oneself, of finding greater meaning in life, and of reaching new dimensions of connectedness with other people and the world." Margaret Newman believed that humans are connected to and interacting with the energy system of the universe and have an individual pattern that is unique to each person, dependent on time and space. This is illustrated by her drawing to the right of the slide. Newman believed that our expanding consciousness is in recognizing these patterns, and that we can grow through that pattern recognition in finding greater consciousness and more meaning in our lives. Margaret Newman also believed that disease is part of that pattern, so health encompasses both disease and non-disease. She believed that nursing involves recognizing the individual in relation to this environment. And she believed that nurses help patients to recognize their own unique pattern, and thus both the patient and the nurse can develop a higher level of consciousness through that nurse-patient partnership. This is illustrated by her drawing here that shows that it is through this connection of the nurse-patient partnership that can lead to a transformational experience for both the patient and the nurse, and that both can find meaning in that interaction and can thus be part of the greater consciousness. I believe that there are many benefits to Margaret Newman's theory. One great benefit is that as nurses, we can help patients find meaning and purpose in whatever state their health is manifesting. It can be used across the spectrum of well-being. This is particularly true for those patients of ours who live with chronic disease and for whom the absence of disease or disability is not possible. I think another great benefit of this theory is that it is general enough to be applied in a wide variety of circumstances and with a broad range of patients. No matter what patients are going through or what their level of disease or disability, there is meaning to be found. And that is something that all nurses can use in practice, regardless of the patient setting which they are in, and regardless of the health or level of disease or disability of the patients with whom they work. Another great benefit is the emphasis on opportunity for deeper meaning for the nurse as well as the patient. The nurse-patient interaction is a partnership and therefore provides a foundation for both to grow and develop in this process of pattern recognition and ultimately in their health. So I believe a great benefit of health of expanding consciousness is that can find meaning for the nurse as well as the patient, and it is not just a one-way partnership. While there are many great benefits to Margaret Newman's theory, I think there are some limitations as well. Applying the theory of health as expanding consciousness can be both subjective and ill-defined. The same generality of the theory that lends itself to wide applicability also creates a vagueness that places a lot of responsibility of interpretation on the individual nurse. Health as expanding consciousness is a very abstract and existential theory, and it can be difficult to understand in practical terms. This can be very limiting, both for the nurse practicing the theory and for the patient for whom she is caring, because it's very dependent on their ability to grasp these more abstract concepts. And sometimes this can be a difficult thing to explain to a patient who is focused on the tasks at hand or particular practical things. Another limitation of health as expanding consciousness is that environment is emphasized repeatedly in this theory and is something that Margaret Newman discusses quite a bit. However, she has difficulty when it comes to arriving at a clear definition or understanding of environment, and so it makes it difficult to implement the meaning of this theory when what environment isn't really expressed or developed in a way that is very tangible. Another challenge that I found with Margaret Newman's theory is that creating meaningful interaction can be difficult even in ideal circumstances. So often we see in healthcare that it is very challenging to find the time and the right dialogue to create an interaction that is meaningful for both patient and nurse. So healthcare being what it is, it can be a big challenge to prioritize and find adequate time for these meaningful interactions. Again, we are often so focused on the practical, getting tasks done and getting patients in and out, that it can be very hard to slow down, to take time in the moment to create these meaningful interactions. Margaret Newman had many contributions to nursing and in healthcare. First and foremost, she gave a new perspective on disease and emphasized health as inclusive of both disease and non-disease. I think this is very important because it is reality for so many of the patients with whom we interact. Disease and disability are a part of their lives and will be for the rest of their lives. And this is something we need to acknowledge and still work with. She also believed that relationship is the primary focus in nursing, and that the goal of nursing is to form this relationship at a critical point in a patient's life and then help them recognize their own patterns in their lives. She really emphasizes the partnership of patients and nursing, and I think that's a very important contribution. Additionally, Margaret Newman really emphasized that pattern recognition is the key toward allowing patients to gain a deeper understanding of themselves as part of a greater consciousness, and thus add greater meaning to their lives. Many of our patients are suffering from disease and disability, and it is such a benefit that she is able to help patients find meaning in that suffering by recognizing these patterns. Additionally, this pattern recognition also gives nurses a greater understanding of themselves and their practice as part of a greater consciousness. Again, this theory really emphasizes the transformational experience of the nurse-patient interaction, and that it is two-way, that patients can be transformed by these meaningful interactions, as well as nurses. There has been a beneficial application of Newman's theory of health as expanding consciousness, and it's been studied and demonstrated in a wide variety of patient populations. One of the primary patient populations in which health as expanding consciousness has been studied is in patients with cancer, and there are many studies that have demonstrated the positive effects of pattern recognition in this population. This is because for many of these cancer patients, they are stage 3 or stage 4, and cancer will be a reality for the rest of their lives. These studies showed that by having meaningful interaction and allowing patients to better recognize the patterns in their own life and their own environment, it can lead to meaningful experiences and a greater development of their own consciousness. The same is true in a study by Neal on patients with rheumatoid arthritis. There was a case study that demonstrated how Newman's caring partnership could benefit both patients and families with a stage 4 cancer diagnosis that was done in 2017. This study created these meaningful interactions with a stage 4 cancer patient and with her family members, and showed that it led to a great difference both in their own mindsets and in how they communicated with each other. In another study done in 2006, pattern recognition was the primary focus on patient population who had chronic skin wounds. Not only did the health of expanding consciousness lead to more positive change in outlook and lifestyle, but it actually demonstrated that there was improvement in the patient's wound healing as well. So they had physical benefits as well as mental and emotional benefits to applying Margaret Newman's theory. Another great benefit is that Margaret Newman's theory is very beneficial to caregivers and nurses as well as to patients. There have been many studies done to give meaning and broaden understanding for patients and caregivers. One was done in 1999 that showed benefits to families and caregivers of patients suffering from schizophrenia. And there were 2 separate studies that showed the benefit of health as expanding consciousness in families with special needs children. Newman continued to study her theory of health as expanding consciousness throughout her career, and she found that it led to greater pattern recognition in patients with HIV and AIDS, cancer, and coronary heart disease. And there was demonstrated benefits both for the patients who are suffering from these illnesses, as well as the families, caregivers, and nurses who took care of them. This theory has been studied all over the world and is continued to be studied to this day, as we are learning more about the importance of finding meaning regardless of one's state of health. In clinical nursing practice, I believe it is going to be very important to use health as expanding consciousness, particularly as a mindset. Using this in clinical practice can be as simple as making a conscious effort to view a patient holistically, and by acknowledging that disease and illness is a necessary part of the patient's pattern of meaning. By having this mindset, nurses can use each interaction, no matter how mundane, as an opportunity for growth and for transformation. While in ideal circumstances, as demonstrated by some of the reviewed studies, this might mean extended and repeated interactions about pattern recognition, it does not always have to be. Sometimes it can be as simple as taking a few extra seconds to see the patient more holistically and to discuss with them things other than the particular task in front of you, but just understanding their whole picture and greater pattern of health. Of paramount importance in this theory is really understanding these patterns and helping patients to understand their own patterns. And by allowing this mutual understanding to lead to higher purpose and meaning for both the patient and the nurse. I think this is something that regardless of your area of practice or regardless of your level of disease for the patients with whom you work can be applied in any setting. And that is the great benefit of Margaret Newman's theory of health as expanding consciousness.